Okay, good morning. I'm coming to you with my next episode of Recent Reads. First thing, Monday morning. I'm working on being a little bit more productive with my time, establishing new habits, that sort of thing. Hence, I'm coming to you first thing Monday morning to talk about the two books that I finished yesterday, both of which I didn't start yesterday, Sunday, but I did read the majority of them that day. So, the first of those is Pride and Premeditation. I mentioned when I read book 3 in this series, because I accidentally read that one first, that I wondered how my opinion of this series would change when I read either this one or Sense and Second Degree Murder, because I know those stories better. And it definitely did. I have to say, one of my all-time favorite stories altogether is Pride and Prejudice. I love that story. I love the book version. I love the movie version. No, I don't have sentimentality towards the BBC version. Haven't really watched that one. I just love the story. And I didn't realize how much I loved it until I was reading this one. There are just certain parts of it that are just so crucial in my mind that it's just hard to write it differently. And it's not that this one was bad. I just think that my overwhelming love for Pride and Prejudice did this book a little bit of a disservice. Now, I think that Tirzah Price had a lot of the same plot beats, a lot of the very important plot beats that Pride and Prejudice has. Of course, she changes it because, it's a murder mystery here. But there are certain plot beats that she changed that I was like, oh, I'm not sure that doing this really shows what Jane Austen was trying to show with those plot beats in the original story. And yes, this is Tirzah Price's story. This is not Jane Austen's story. Tirzah Price is trying to do slightly different things. And it's hard to separate those two different parts, but I did really enjoy this. And I think that the way that this one was told was better than Manslaughter Park. Obviously, there's going to be romance in here. So the one thing that really held me back with Manslaughter Park was how the romance unfolded at the end and how rushed and how overwhelming that became, because that's not what Jane Austen does in her novels. Yes, there are romances in there, those are with like the big points, but she's much more subtle. This, Tirzah Price followed almost exactly, not quite, but almost exactly the same sort of subtle plot beats to the romance that Manslaughter Park did not do. So I did appreciate that. I also appreciate this book because it reawakened my love for the original. Now that I'm talking about this, I realized I was going to be a little bit more harsh on my review when I put it through Compile, but I'm not going to, because this is a different type of book. It reawakened that love, like I just mentioned, for the original story, and it was also a fun read. And certain characters got more of a comeuppance. You really rooted for them to get what they deserved in here, which I enjoyed. Certain character interpretations, though, I'm not so sure about. I did enjoy this one, ultimately. Is it going to be a super high star read? No, it's probably going to be a low 4-star, but I enjoyed it. Now, the other one I don't have physically, and this was a little bit more complicated of feelings, if you can believe that. And that was Two Twisted Crowns, which is the second book and the conclusion in the Shepherd King duology by Rachel Gillig. Now, I think that One Dark Window was her debut. I enjoyed that a lot more than I was expecting. I think I ended up rating that 4 stars. And I got approved for the arc of the second book. Will I be going out to purchase the second book? No. By the end of the second book, though, I realized, okay, yeah, I liked it. It saved itself, basically. I started reading this on ebook, and I read a little bit Saturday, and I read a little bit Sunday, and it was just going a lot slower than I expected, and I was like, I'm just not engaged in this narrative. I could back up and tell you a little bit about the book at this point. Let me do that. The world of One Dark Window is very unique. I appreciated the magic system that Rachel Gillig put in there, which was very much tied to these Providence cards, which seem very similar to tarot cards. And each of these Providence cards has a certain magical thing that they can do, but there's also a downside, a horrible downside to it. There's also a fog that if you don't have a charm and you go into this fog, you become infected and you're able to do magic, but a different kind of magic. And that's considered evil and you're supposed to be killed and like wiped out. And the main character, Elspeth, is infected, but she's saved. Her family doesn't kill her or turn her over like they're supposed to. But her type of infection, her type of magic, I should say, makes it so that whenever she touches a card, she absorbs whatever that magic is, whatever's on the card. The first and only card that she touches is the nightmare card. And so now the nightmare is stuck in her head. And so it looks like she's not actually infected. She's not degenerating, but she is. That degeneration happens fully at the end of the first book. And I wondered how Rachel Gillig was going to play that out. And I think she did it in a really interesting way. So coming back to my experience of reading the second book, I just was not really engaged with it, and it was taking a really long time to read. And I was really wondering, should I just DNF it? I wasn't even far enough through. I was only 38% through. And I thought, maybe I'll go onto Libby and I'll see if there's an audiobook version of it. This is hilarious, but when I opened up Libby, literally it popped up, your hold is now available. I'd forgotten that I'd already put the audiobook on hold. So that was perfect timing. And so I switched over and I finished it, the remaining 60% on audiobook. And that was definitely a good choice. Even though the narrator at first kind of grated on my nerves, I got used to her eventually. But I was able to engage with the story a lot better as an audiobook than as an ebook. And I don't know whether that's a me thing as a reader or what. That still didn't mean that I absolutely loved it. I was able to engage with it more, so it might end up squeaking out a 4-star. It might not. But there were a few not so fade to black scenes or almost fade to black scenes. Actually, mainly just one, maybe one or two, but it got really awkward. They weren't between Elspeth and Raven, the main characters, the main love interest of the first book. You bring in a whole other perspective. I don't think that Elm had a perspective, or at least a fairly big perspective, in the first book. And her cousin Ione, that seemed to come out of left field for me because none of that was hinted at in the first book. It felt awkward to me. It felt love at first sight, the insta-love, basically. It ended up being fine. And there were certain parts that really got me. Like, Ione is, when she's basically bartered by her father, she's given the maiden card. And what the maiden card does is makes a person completely beautiful, but it also cuts off their emotions. And you find out that she's given the maiden card, made to use it, but then also compelled by the scythe card to hide it. And she doesn't remember where she hides it. So literally, she's trying to find her maiden card because she wants to feel again. And she hasn't felt for a very long time. There's terrible things that have happened to her throughout this time. And I thought that Rachel Gillig did this scene very well. When she actually finds her maiden card, Elm is there with her when she taps it again and the power of the maiden card is released. And that just, ooh, that got me. So there was that. But then there was the almost, but not quite fade to black scene, which I'm like, wait, is this young adult or is this adult? There were just a few things that felt kind of not so sure about that. The way that it wrapped up, I did appreciate. The way that the lore wrapped up and the creation of the cards was explained, I thought she did a decent job with that. Ultimately, though, is it going to be one that I remember? No. Am I going to go out and buy book 2? No. Am I going to immediately get rid of book 1? Definitely not. It's a gorgeous book. It's one of my book box books. So, mixed bag there, but a decent read. And I'm glad I got the audiobook so that I could salvage that. I stayed on track. That was my 21st book read, and Sunday was the 21st, so I'm on track with 30 and 30. We shall see how this week goes. Okay, it's time for the next update. I could have updated about these yesterday, but I didn't have enough time in the morning because I was filming a couple other things. So I'm going to update about 2 books, and then the other 2 that I have finished since then, I'll update about tomorrow, probably. So the first of those is Supernova by Marissa Meyer. This concludes the Renegades trilogy, so I am marking a series off of my list. This is a series that I started pre-booktube, so that helps with that goal. And I have constantly been really intrigued by the way that Marissa Meyer is able to keep this plot going. I do have to say that at times in this book, I just felt like, even though it didn't necessarily read that way, I just felt like there's just so much. Like, all of the books were this length. In this plot, the plot felt a little bit bloated. And I don't know necessarily what she could have cut, but around the middle, I just kind of felt like this is just a lot that's in here. But then the end comes. And I had no idea, with like 2-3 hours left of the audiobook, how she was going to wrap things up, how she was going to bring things together from both sides of the story. I would have loved to see a little bit more to do with her father, with Nova's father, who dies at the way before the story starts. That's like her villain origin story. I would have loved to see more about him and learn a little bit more about what he can do. But what we get in here is great. And the way that it wraps up is just so well done. And one of the things that I thought about throughout the series was how Nova had basically been brainwashed by her uncle and used by her uncle in a way that she felt certain things were true about her life, but then at the end, she learns other things. And it's not like she automatically sees that the other side is, oh, perfect, and they've done everything right. No, they still have conflicts there. There are still things that didn't necessarily go the way that they were supposed to. But she learns certain things about her uncle and what he has done and how that night unfolded that reach into, it's like a catalyst for what she's already been thinking and learning and growing in. And it was very well done. There were several character deaths in here. One especially, a very minor character, but an influential character. Ooh, when that character died, I gasped out loud. I was heartbroken because that was rough. And also, the epilogue in here, all I will say is that the epilogue is done from another character's point of view. And when it's revealed, I just went, Marissa Meyer, you didn't. This is the end of this series. And you leave it that way? Well done. So this one, the series overall, I think is a 4-star series for me. I don't know what this book will get. Probably a 4-star. But I did really enjoy it. And I've enjoyed most of the Marissa Meyer books that I have read. That brings me to the book that I read, quote unquote, physically. Because this is so tightly bound, I checked out an ebook copy of it from the library to read that. And that is Paulo Santiago and the Forest of Nightmares. This helps with my Rick Riordan project. And it also is my Buzzwordathon book for this month because it was something related to nightmares. Not nightmares, nature. I have to admit that when I first started reading this, I had this confused as to which series it was. And I was thinking Pauamoa. And that's a different series. And the characters are very different. The writing styles of Lori Lee and Taylor K. Mejia, very different. So I was a little lost at the beginning. But I quickly settled in once I realized, oh, different character. Because she doesn't go by Paula, she goes by Pau. So I had Paua, Pau, my brain, they put both together. But in this one, it picks up several months after the events of the first one, in which they are working together to defeat La Llorona. Ultimately, I was wondering, at the end of that one, like, are they going to have like a villain of the week kind of thing? But this is still connected to La Llorona in a way. Now, La Llorona was still defeated, as you can assume, as is the style for these kinds of books. But it's several months later, and she's kind of lost both of her friendships. And it's in a way that's kind of typical of friends growing apart until like one of them is not And I really like what Mejia did in this book and how she was developing the characters. I still think she kind of did Dante a little dirty, but excuse the honest, first thing in the morning. But what's happening with Dante, her best friend for years, is not resolved at the end of this book. I think that it's going to be the driving conflict in the conclusion to the trilogy. But this book was a huge step up from book one, especially in my enjoyment. Obviously, I can't talk too much about the plot because it is book two in a series, but Pao is learning a lot about herself. In the first book, she spent most of it away from like reality, in the void area or whatever you call that. And she was kind of running on adrenaline basically. But in this one, most of the time is spent in the quote unquote real world. And she has to look through like, what is her relationship with her mom, with her dad who left when she was 3. And it's a lot more human. And the way that Mejia did that, the character growth in Pao is phenomenal. So I cannot wait to read the conclusion to this trilogy. Okay, so welcome to the last and what will be a very long update for this week. Apparently, on Sunday, we are orange. I don't know why that is. I don't know what about the lighting does this, because I have filmed in the morning before on other mornings. Who knows? The reason for the long update. 1, I have several books to talk about. I have 4 books to talk about. I don't plan to talk super long about any of them, but there are 4 of them. And then the other reason is I discovered that I might be one of the last bookworms in my local area to know that there is a place, it's called the Book Warehouse Outlet, every single month has a massive sale on books that are basically new. Maybe slightly damaged, but basically new. 70% off. It is a warehouse full of books, and they do this every weekend. 1 weekend a month. And I didn't know about this. This has been a thing that's been going on for I don't even know how long. My dad happened to see something on Facebook probably. Of course, he supports my habit, and he told me about it, and I decided to go this time. I brought 2 bags. I brought these 2 bags because they're the sturdiest and they are the best equipped for carrying books. And I thought, oh man, I thought I had more. I'll just stick with the 2. I forgot that I have my bag for the Strand. Anyway, that was probably a good thing that I didn't bring more bags. Because once I got to the fantasy section, that bag got full quite quickly. Of the books that I bought, and 1 puzzle, yes, I have read 1 of them. Technically, I've read a version of it. I got a young reader's version of it to go in my classroom. That's going to take the bulk. And you know what? I'm trying to decide. Yeah, I'm going to go over that first. This is not something I'm going to go to every month. And if I remember, I'll put in the picture. When we were leaving, there's a whole other half of the warehouse that they didn't open up to the public, full of boxes, unopened boxes of books. I'll have to keep myself from going every month. So the puzzle that I got, super cool. It's a map, street food of different area. I'm really excited about it. So that's the only puzzle that I got. And yes, puzzles and books, they go together. I stand by that. So let's talk about the smallest stack. I did also purchase 3 books. No, I purchased 1 book for my dad and he got 2 others. And we ended up with one where I think when I was switching out between hardback and paperback of a book, I think I accidentally picked up one. So I set my stack down that was on top that wasn't in the bag. And then when I picked it up, I ended up with another book. That's not in this haul. I'm not actually interested in that book. But when I was putting it in the car, I'm like, I didn't even pay attention to that. Do I have a problem? We're not going to go there. Anyway, I'm going to talk about the nonfiction section. I probably could have spent more time, but I'm a little bit pickier when it comes to those. So I did get 2 memoirs. I got No Ashes in the Fire, Coming of Age, Black and Free in America by Darnell Moore. And I also got Miseducated by Brandon R. Fleming. Those are the 2 memoirs. The others, I read the title, it hooked me in. I read the description, and also this one, super floppy. This is The Right to Vote, The Contested History of Democracy in the United States. We've got America for Americans, A History of Xenophobia in the United States. This is probably a surefire way to get me upset. And then this one, it was So they've got those big giant shelves that you'll see at like warehouse stores, plus a top shelf that I couldn't have reached. I saw the title and went, I want to read the subtitle to see what that means. I couldn't read it. Thankfully, my dad is 6'2", so he's taller than me, and he was able to stick his phone up and take a picture of the subtitle because it was just the side of it. And I read it and I went, I want it. Can you please get that down for me? The problem was it was a stack on top of like 5 of this book and like 6 or 7 of another book. So somehow he was able to pull one out without it falling, which was good work. And that is The Book at War. How reading shaped conflict and conflict shaped reading. How could I, as a reader, not get this one? That's the first section. I'm also trying to think of where to put it because I've got stacks on stacks on stacks of books because I still have my May TBR books over here, and I've got my read books for this month, and then I've got my unboxing books. I've got a lot of books stacked up around me. I need to organize those. Anyway, here's the one book that I have read, My Family Divided by Diane Guerrero. This is the young readers version, and I saw this and went, yes, I want to have it for my classroom library. It's a really good book. It's talking about, so Diane Guerrero is an actress, and because she was born in the US, she has American citizenship, but her parents did not, and they were deported, and she was left in the United States. And she's telling her story about this, and I definitely want this for my classroom library because I think it's going to identify with a lot of those students. So the next stack I have, I've read different books by 2 of the authors as I look through here. The other ones, they just caught my eye. These were some of the first ones that I put in because I walked in and it was like the young adult section. So the one of the ones that I've read before is The Enigma Game by Elizabeth Wine. I have read Codename Verity and really enjoyed it. I don't normally go for World War II stories, but her other book was just so good that I definitely wanted to give this a try. And then I just read an arc by Matali Perkins. Because I've been reading so many of those arcs, I don't remember which one that was, but it was really good. And so I got 2 books by her. These are both young adult. The arc that I read, I think, was middle grade, but I have You Bring the Distant Star, 5 Girls, 3 Generations, One Great American Love Story, and then Forward Me Back to You. I think it's Forward Me Back to You. I read that. My inflection on that was really weird. So this one I actually don't know a lot about, but that cover, the design is phenomenal. The other ones, I just picked it up because I thought were interesting. This one, it was the title, When Life Gives You Demons. I had to get that one. Some of these are young adult, some of them are middle grade. They were kind of all in the same section. That's another thing about the organization. I probably could have gotten a lot more, but I was doing my best with the way that they have it organized. We have A Baker's Guide to Robber Pie. It's probably a middle grade fantasy. I'm not going to give synopsis for everything. We'd be here forever. I've got The Beast Player. I think I've seen this cover before, but when I saw this and then saw the Prince Award, I'm like, okay, gotta have it. This one, I think is already on my TBR because I have a book cover sticker already printed out for it, and I'm really intrigued by it. This is The Museum of Lost and Found by Layla Sales. This one I got because I've read other things by Marie Lu. It's a graphic novel. It's something that they might be interested in. I got this one primarily for my classroom library, and that is Batman Nightwalker, the graphic novel by Marie Lu. A few years ago, like 2018 or so, there were a lot of DC novels written by well-known authors. Marie Lu wrote the Batman one. I think Cassandra Clare wrote Catwoman. I don't know how many of those they did, but that's a graphic novel version of that. This is on my list for books to read. Well, the author of this other one, and I haven't gotten to it yet, but I've heard really good things about it. This is The Chosen One by Echo Brown. The book that's already on my TBR is Black Girl Unlimited. I've heard really good things about it. And the last one is Forever This Summer by Leslie Youngwood. I said the last one. That's the last young adult or middle grade. Now let's get into the fantasy section. I basically, if it was a series that I was interested in, if it was the first book in a series, I picked it up. I almost got the first book in John Gwynn's new series, but unfortunately, some of them are damaged, and the damage that I saw on this took out a chunk probably about that wide of several pages in the middle. I was like, oh man, I didn't pick it up, but someone else apparently did because it wasn't there on the way back. But so I've got a lot in here that I've seen going around. By the way, I did convince my dad to pick up The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. So excited about that. So a lot of these, I don't know anything about it, but I've heard good things about the books. Some of them are finishing, one of them is finishing a series. So without further ado, let's just show these books. We've got Ruination by Anthony Reynolds. I've heard really good things about this, I think from Elliot Brooks. This is a stretch, but I'm willing to give it a shot. One where I have book one. I haven't read it yet. I have read from this author before. This author is the favorite of Jade from JD Rare Reads. Our fantasy tastes align a lot. I've read other books from him and really enjoyed his snarky humor. So that's the Greycoat series. They had 2 books from that series there. They had Soulbinder and Queenslayer. These are books 4 and 5. I have book 1. So I still need to get book 2 and 3. Have I read book 1 in the series yet? No, we're going to ignore that. But anyway, I've got The Combat Codes by Alexander Darwin, The Book of Gothel by Mary McMine, The Darkness Before Them by Matthew Ward. This one, I was a little bit nervous about, not because of the book, but because I thought I might already have it, but thankfully I didn't. This is the 3rd book in a series that I started last year, and I've been trying to get the rest of the books in that trilogy, and I was not able to find a used copy or a cheaper copy or version of the 3rd book in the series. I thought I might have found it. I just checked my own TBR closet. I don't, and that is The Labyrinth's Heart by M.A. Carrick. I really enjoyed book 1 in the series. I think this might actually be the same size as the used copy of The Liar's Knot, which is book 2. I don't know how I'm going to get on with this because I'm not huge on space opera, but I've heard really good things about the series. So I got Leviathan Wakes. I saw they had some pictures out and I saw some of the books in this series. I didn't think they would actually have book 1 in this 9-book series, but they did. So I'm going to give it a try. This one, I've read book 1 in the series, but I don't own it. I got it as a library book. So why did I purchase book 2? I'm not really sure. If I really like book 2 as well, I will go back and purchase book 1. And that is The Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri. I just realized it seems like there's water damage on this book. So that's a bit annoying, but that's one of the reasons they end up at that sale. We've got The Lost War by Justin Lee Anderson. I showed restraint on this one. They had book 1 and 2 of this series. I didn't get both. I got just book 1. I've got Son of the Storm by Suni Davies Okunbawa. This next one I had to double check in my mind because there's 2 books that I always get confused, and I know that I have one of them and that have Ashes in the title, but thankfully I remembered and did double check. I have Age of Ash by Daniel Abraham, and it's the other one that I always get it confused with is Ashes of the Sun by Django Wexler. These are all ones that I have heard about and was wanting to try. I got Ancillary Justice by Ann Leckie. They had a couple in this series, but again, I showed restraint. I mean, the 2 massive stacks don't show that I showed restraint, but I did show restraint and just got book 1. And the last one, I finished off a series. I haven't read book 1 yet, but I absolutely love N.K. Jemisin. I got The Obelisk Gate and The Stone Sky, which is book 2 and book 3 in the 5th season series. Now that I think about it, they did also have The Thousand Kingdoms duology, or at least book 2 in it, but I didn't pick that one up because I haven't started that series yet. So those are all of the books that I bought yesterday. The one that I got my dad, so my dad is obsessed with Civil War stuff. Mostly his library is of World War II and Civil War stuff. Stereotypical man, I know. Anyway, he just really loves it. But this book, the fact that it exists is phenomenal. All of the New York Times coverage of the Civil War in one book. That is phenomenal. So I did purchase that one for him. That's probably was a big chunk of what I purchased. Speaking of which, I don't actually know the total because I was like stacking up the books. I just handed her my credit card.
I've been out of my head, can't get out of bed. Too much on my brain, but got it good, can't complain. It's like I'm losing my mind, and time's hard to find. What's else a girl gotta do to catch a break up? When life tries to test me, I take it one day at a time. 'Cause I was crying yesterday, but look at me today. It has been so long since I wrote a sad song.
Anyway, let's get to the books that I read. I don't think I'm going to end up finishing one today because I started Kingdom of Copper, which is book 2 in the Daevabad trilogy. I'm really enjoying it, but that's a 22-hour audiobook, so I don't think I'm going to finish that today. I think I'm going to finish it tomorrow, but I am on track for 30 and 30, and I was thinking yesterday when I was pulling out the book stickers that I have to put in my reading journal, I was just flipping through all the books. I'm like, wow, I'm reading a book a day practically, and I still have so many books that I want to get to. How am I going to get to all of these books? I love having that problem. Am I weird? Yes. Okay, so I have 2 books physically and 2 books not physically because I had them as ARCs. So I'm going to talk about those first. So first off, we have The Night Raven by Johan, and I don't remember the last name. It is a translated book from Norwegian, I believe, somewhere Scandinavian. And it is a middle grade mystery book with a hint of horror, because some of the things that happened in here is a little bit fantastical as well, which I really enjoyed. So I have discovered that I like mystery novels with either a hint or full-on speculative and fantasy. And this one, the protagonist, yes, she read older than middle grade age, but in a way that was believable because she lived at an orphanage. It's very destitute, and she's clearly had to grow up very quickly, far beyond her. So she's wise beyond her years, but the way that it was written was done well. It was believable that she was still an 11, 12-year-old, just she's had to face the realities of life. And so that's why she's as mature sounding as she is. And I really enjoyed it. It was very short, was very quick. So again, you've got the mystery with the hint at the speculative, and I just thought it was really well done. So I think last year was when it was translated into English, but it was published in 2019 or 2020. And there's one other book in the series, at least that I think that has been translated into English. I'll have to see if in the original there's more, because I'll be eagerly anticipating those. The other one is a sequel or a companion novel to another book that I read last year as an audiobook and have a physical copy of and absolutely loved. It was a massive 5-star. I think it was on some of my top books of the year. The sequel is not going to make my top books of the year, and it's fine. That's fine. I wondered, reading this sequel, which I automatically got through NetGalley, I wondered how it would possibly live up to the magnificence of the first book, because there was just so much there, and it doesn't quite. And that book is Rain Remembers. So in the first book, you have a single mom, you have 2 siblings, they're about 4 years apart, and Rain is the titular narrative character. She struggles with depression, and her older brother has gotten into this fancy school, and everybody loves him, and he's on a college trip with a white friend of his, and there's an incident that happens. He is physically affected and then also mentally affected, and the whole family is. And that first book was just a phenomenal look into the real life experiences of mental health struggles and how to build actual support, crawl your way out of there. And it was very clear at the end of that one that everything's not going to be magically solved and she's never going to have these struggles again. That was very clear. In Rain Remembers, it's the next year. So the brother is off at college. She is starting high school, which is another big change. And some of the support system that she had from middle school is not there. So it's a different counselor, psychologist. She had this thing called Circle Group where she made some friends. She still has those friends, but they didn't have that tool that they had at the middle school. And she starts getting attention from a boy that is no good. But one of the things about her depression is she was so negative about her own self-worth. And so getting this attention she laps it up. And how that unfolds, it messes with her mental health. And it just, again, was just a window into the realities of the struggle that they're going to keep coming and how to try to make your way through all of that. And I thought it was well done. I just couldn't help in my mind comparing it to the first one, which was just phenomenal. This one is probably going to be a 4.5-star read, not quite a 5-star read, because there was just a little bit too much of the high school stuff, but I still really recommend it. Then we get to the books that I read physically. This was one of the books, so one of the classes for Magical Readathon, I still need to fill that out and submit all of those, but for one of them, you were supposed to write the names of series or books that you wanted to read on slips of paper and like shuffle them or pull them from a hat. And the one that I pulled for that was City of Last Chances. I obviously read that one, and I said when I was picking them up that the other ones that I chose, I probably would try to read those. And yeah, Kingdom of Copper was one of them, and I'm reading that one. And this was the third of those, The Wolf of Orinyaru by K.S. Veloso. I loved this so much. This is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. The main character is a girl who has grown up as the daughter of a warlord who was fighting amongst these clans to gain control of this relatively small kingdom or area in comparison to an empire. There's also an empire that they're trying to deal with. She's known from birth that she's going to end up marrying the heir to another clan. And it seems like it's going well. She actually like falls in love with her husband, but there's other things going on. And at the outset, she's supposed to be crowned. Finally, so is he. They're supposed to rule together, sort of like in a Ferdinand and Isabella way in Spain, where they still were the rulers of their specific areas, but they were ruling together. But he decides to leave, and he just up and leaves, and everyone at that like casts doubt on her ability as a ruler. And she also has a very young son at the time who's constantly asking for his father. That was the prologue, and that's 5 years before the events of the book. And at the start of this book, there's a lot of the other warlords and stuff that she's ruling over. They're really not believing in her authority or supporting her. She's having to go through a lot more effort to rule than she should. But she gets another letter. Finally, it's like the second or third letter from her husband wanting to meet and negotiate. And I forget those details exactly. So she goes off to where her husband is. And the way that the plot unfolds from there, it just explodes and it takes off in a completely different way. And she is having to find her way in a completely unfamiliar world without all the trappings of power and authority that she had because of her status as a ruler. And there's another character that gets involved that I absolutely love. And she's dealing with trying to like deal with these feelings of love and resentment against her husband. Did he betray her? It's so well done. I cannot wait to read the other books in this series. This is phenomenal. I love it. And I'm so excited that I love it. And the last book that I read, I wanted to complete a book, and I knew that the arc that I started reading, one of the Rick Riordan Presents imprints, A Drop of Venom, it's not an arc anymore. It was published early this year. I knew I wouldn't be able to finish it in the time that I had left to read, so I picked up one of my graphic novels that I got earlier this year at the book sale at my school, and that is The Magic Fish. And I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name because I don't want to butcher it, and I don't know how to pronounce it accurately. I've heard such stunning things about this book, which is a graphic memoir, basically, combined with fairy tales. And it's the author's attempt, he's telling the story of how he was trying to communicate to his mother. And it's woven together with fairy tales, and the artwork in here is stunning. It's some of the best artwork I've seen in a graphic novel. And there's different colorways for the different things. When they're telling the fairy tales, it's like this muted purplish. And when there's scenes from the mother's side, because she was in Vietnam and they had to flee to the United States, and they're now all American citizens, his mother and father. It's so poignant. The whole story of what he's trying to tell her. She's dealing with the fact that she's been separated from her own mom for 8 years, and her own mom is not doing well. And the way that it's woven together, and they make conscious choices on the styling from these different fairy tales, because they're really fairly well-known types of fairy tales, but with different twists, like the versions of them in like Vietnam and other types. But the way that like the artistry behind it, it's stylized not in the stereotypical medieval castle-y vibes of fairy tales like you would normally see, but like in 1950s Vietnam. And I just, the way that there was so much purpose behind the artwork as well, this was just stunning, and it was a delight to read. So there you go. There are all of the books that I read this past week. I am going to use some of my book haul to stand in for some of those books that I read and I don't have physical copies of. I believe I read like 3 or 4, but I'm just going to put 3 on this stack. I have enjoyed everything that I've read this week, which is absolutely phenomenal. I got a bunch of good books that I'm really excited about. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.